Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or should I say good afternoon. This is Eddie Marcus, spokesman and advocate of basic human rights for all people, and this is the 3rd of March. It is a Sunday, and for some strange reason, I got a message to you that has some reference to God on this occasion. And my subject that I would like to use is, what is, and I'm sure you got the answer, the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment. Well, now, when we talk about greatest commandment, we're usually talking about God. And for most people, don't know anything about what God is, except what we've heard people say about God, what we've read about God, and what we've been preached to about God, and maybe whatever we have concluded is representative of God. Some have said that God represents the cause, that God represents the creator, God represents the maker, God represents the power. And I would put all of that together and say it is by the power I experienced that is not human that made me without doubt convinced of God, and allows me to stand before you today knowing what you've been taught, because I was taught the same thing, but I was born again by a new experience, and that allows me to stand here before you knowing that I sound crazy to you, but it's okay. The greatest commandment: thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, their body, their soul, and their mind. Ain't that something? Love God with all that you can say is you. Now, to get some census here, I decided I'd go back to old man Webster and see if I can come up with something that I could refer to that maybe we could all kind of say, okay, we'll go there. So, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about God, for me, I'm talking about power. I don't know what you see God as. But when we talk about love, I wanted to see what does old man Google or Webster say about love. They say love means to care for. If you love something, you care for it. You care for it. I know a lot of people say, well, I've said a lot, heard a lot of people say they love people and they didn't show any caring about them. Well, if love means to care for, well, now we understand we must love God. That means we must care for this power, that I must care for this power. We as human beings must care for this power in pursuit of life. We must do this with our heart, with our ever being life force. We must do it with all of the compassion and empathy that we can muster. All of it. It is God. So we're giving to God what is God. And we must do this with our physical, our human bodies. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Our physical human bodies, our whole physical structure that is considered as a person. We must do this expressing our soul, an immaterial essence, actuating, my friends, principles as a cause of an individual life. Ain't that something? Immaterial essence. I left a word out called animating principles, or actuating cause of an individual life. And a spiritual principle embodied in human beings. Now, we've all heard, if you're black especially, but in America, some probably heard that there's a spirit in us that gives us the life force. You know, it's not just the breath of life, but there is a spirit. We often say, we might not understand what it is, but we say. And basically, as Google and Webster says, many of us might get some kind of understanding out of that. But we must also love God with all our mind. With all of our mind. The element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences. The mind. The element of a person that allows them to be aware of all the things that are around them. The things that you get involved in from day to day. to think, to feel, the faculty of consciousness and thought. Kind of deep, make it seem like we add a little bit invested in us as people. So this is what we do when we say loving God. This is what we do when we think about the first commandment. We should love the Lord thy God with all our heart, with all our body, with all our soul, with all our minds. Yes. This is the first, they say, and great commandment. The first and great commandment. All the city, anything that has to do with acceptance, give God the credit. That's truth and good. Give God the credit. Now, that's the first commandment. What is the second commandment? The second commandment is that you should love your neighbor as yourself. Your neighbor as yourself. How do you love yourself? You want everything for yourself. You want everything to be just right. You want everything to be met. Your needs, your wants, and your desires. You want peace and prosperity and freedom and joy in your life. You definitely do. Not only that, you want happiness, and you want to live your dreams. You want your needs, your wants, and your desires met when you want them done. You don't want to have to go through no jive turkey to get it done. That's you. Now, if that's the way you feel about yourself, that's the way you must feel about your neighbor. And who is your neighbor? Everybody else. It's not just Eve. It's not just your wife. It's not just your children. Your neighbor is everybody else. All the white folks. All the black people. All the red people. All the yellow people. And anybody else that's left. They are all our neighbors. And check this out, ladies and gentlemen. I just got through saying how we care about ourselves. I just based that on how I care about me. Now just think about, I care about you the same way. I want what I just got through describing for me. And I know you got the same kind of setup. And I don't want nothing to mess with your setup as long as you, and the thing that makes it so righteous is that your setup doesn't mess up my setup doesn't mess up your setup. Why? Because when we look at the table, we can see the top and the bottom. So we know, my friends, that this, my friends, is the way of life. You're understanding that God is. White folks are not God. Black folks are not God. Americans are not God. Chinese are not God. Africans are not God. Other people of the world are not God. Money, diamonds and gold and silver and oil and any other stuff that you call precious is not God. It's not even really that important beyond what it is used for as far as the fuel. And I don't know what gold and all that kind of stuff is really used for. I know what it's abused for. But none of that, my friend, none of that can draw you away from God. None of that can draw you away from the way that you feel about your neighbor and the way you respect your neighbor, respond to your neighbor, and they respond to you. Now, my friends, this is the way of life. And when you live like this, loving God, like you love, let me see, who you respect. Some people respect their parents. Let's say you love God like those who love your parents. Some people respect their teachers and people that supervise and stuff like that. People who got some kind of control over them. Well, you're loving God like that. And some people even love a lover, a husband, a wife, children. And you're loving God like that. You know, all that deep, deep, deep stuff. And then you're loving human beings. You're loving yourself and him. You can't go wrong. How can a person come and tell you a lie and it be bought? You're loving God and your neighbor. What did it say about the second? The second commandment. The first is love the Lord thy God. The second is love your neighbor as yourself. And what does it say about it? On these two commandments, on these, the first, loving God and your people, hangs all the law, God's law, wrapped up in it, and the prophets. Anything that's going to happen is wrapped up in that. Now, let me ask you, how do you fit in that? Now, some people might say, well, that doesn't make too much sense, but Marcus, the world don't operate like that. Well, no, the world doesn't operate like that. This is not about how the world operates. This is about the call for how the world was supposed to operate, how the world will operate if it were doing the things that were pleasing to the Creator. And the reason that it is not, because the Creator, and it is, the Creator gave you choice. So you can say, I love God. I love me. And I love you. And ain't no law, ain't no constitution, ain't no racism, ain't no hatred, ain't no bigotry, ain't nothing gonna make me treat you any other way. Because we are to love. We are to love one another as ourselves. We are to treat people as ourselves. Yes, we're supposed to love straight people, and we're supposed to love gay people. We're supposed to be the greatest lovers on the face of the earth. And if anybody's supposed to be punished, that's God's business. For us, we don't try to punish anybody, because in order for us to try to punish somebody, we got to become that which we are trying to punish. And God did not give us that. If we're going to change something, let us make sure that we are changed, and let us not give life to anything other than that which we stand for. So the game, it's over. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.